feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows or 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the Super League and a little bit more details on what the pitch actually was from them. But now let's talk about the NFL Draft. We are only 1 week out from round one, from the big night that everyone will be there, dressed to the nines, looking their best, and there's a lot of stuff happening with the NFL Draft. I think things are starting to crystallize a little bit more as we get closer and closer to the big day, and I think at least towards the top, it feels like things are starting to crystallize with one. Excuse me, I just knocked over my mic, with one very major exception. But let's start up at the top. The more and more I look at these mock drafts, the more I feel confident that it is going to be Caleb Williams 1, Jaden Daniels 2, and Drake May 3. Now, the Pats are one that's a little bit more unknown. I think they could go wide receiver. I think they could trade down, but it feels like Drake May is going to end up being a Patriot. It feels like Jaden Daniels will be a Commander, and unless something crazy happens, Caleb Williams will be a Bear. So it'll be really interesting to see if anything changes with that. But at the end of the day, I really do feel like that's where everyone's going to end up. Now, where does that leave J.J. McCarthy? Because there was a lot of kind of back and forth between, is it going to be J.J. McCarthy as QB3 or is it going to be Drake May? Could J.J. McCarthy even be QB2 in this draft and go to the Commanders? Which I didn't necessarily think was a big possibility, but it seems like he's kind of come back down to where he kind of started this process, at least after the Combine, where he was sitting, which is around 4 or 5. I've seen mainly the Vikings trading up to get a quarterback in that position. Now I've seen them take Drake May because J.J. McCarthy went to the Patriots. I've seen them take J.J. because Drake May went to the Patriots. So I think the Vikings are kind of in a situation where they like either of those guys. They feel very confident that the top two are going to be the top two in Caleb Williams and in Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. But I do think there is a little bit of things up in the air when it comes to Drake May or J.J. McCarthy. Not exactly sure what the Patriots are thinking right this second. I'd lean Drake May, but whoever it isn't at pick 3, it's going to be at pick 4 or 5, depending on who they trade up with. Now, I tend to believe that Arizona will stay put at number 4, so I think it will be likely the Vikings trading up from 11 to get that Chargers pick at 4, but it'll be really interesting to kind of see that develop over the next little bit. I think the Cardinals are one that I personally would just stay put and get Marvin Harrison Jr. I think you need the guy that can absolutely be a difference maker, and although you're kind of in a position where you're not 100% sure that Kyler Murray is your long-term solution at quarterback, I think having someone like Marvin Harrison Jr. in the building whenever that new guy comes in is a massive advantage for them going forward. So I wouldn't put anything up to chance if I was Arizona. I would grab Marvin Harrison Jr. and just keep it moving. I would just try to do my best with this draft, not try to overthink it, and keep it moving for this year, and then, you make decisions down the road type of thing. But after that, after the number 5 pick, which in a lot of mock draft is J.J. McCarthy going to the Vikings, which I've talked about a little bit, but I think is just a remarkable fit for him. I think it would be as good of a fit as he possibly could have at this next level. So would be very excited for that. And then you get 6 through 9, and it feels like it is the same thing over and over and over again when I look through these mock drafts. We have Malik Neighbors at 6 to the Giants. I've seen that 10,000 times. You have Joe Alt at 7 to the Titans. I don't know if I've ever seen a pick different than that at number 7, to be totally honest with you. Dallas Turner at 8 to the Falcons, and then Roma Dunze at 9 to the Bears. So that's what I tend to expect to happen. Now, the Falcons are still kind of the wild card there. There has been some talk about maybe them trading with the Jets for the Jets to trade up and get Roma Dunze if they really, really like him. I think there's been some talk about them possibly taking Byron Murphy at the defensive tackle position there. So the Falcons are a little bit up in the air, but I keep seeing Dallas Turner's name next to the Falcons, and I feel like that's probably where they'll end up a week from today. But at 10, it's kind of an interesting situation. So the Jets are in a position where you probably need a little bit more help in terms of wide receiver or tight end help. So I've seen some Brock Bowers picks right here, which I think would be a great pick. I've seen linemen here, and that's where I tend to lean, if I'm being totally honest. I think when you look at wide receivers and you look at tight ends, I think there's an ability, or there's this tendency, I think, when we're looking around the NFL, is to just take the last year and use that as the only moniker for what this team can be. And I think the wide receivers didn't look necessarily great last year because the quarterback play wasn't necessarily great last year. But I think with Aaron Rodgers back, Garrett Wilson will be playing at a very high level. I think you have Alan Lazard there as well. So I don't know if that's as quite a big of a need as offensive line. So in a mock draft that Mel Kiper and Field Yates did, where they kind of did a ping pong type draft, they had Troy Fautanu going as a combo O lineman from Washington, did a mock draft with him going to the Jets. So I think that would be a great pickup, would be someone you can put at tackle or guard if you absolutely need to. So definitely some upside there, and I think that's the way that personally I would go, I guess, if I was the Jets GM. But then kind of the run on offensive linemen happens very quickly. You have J.C. Latham at 11. You have Fashanu Fuaga from Oregon State. You have Graham Barton from Duke, Amarius Mims from Georgia, Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma, and then Jordan Morgan from Arizona, all in the first round in this Kiper-Yates mock draft that we're talking about. And I think they're right. I mean, there's so many teams that are going to need offensive tackle help. There always are teams that need offensive tackle or offensive line help. And they might just have to push up to the first to get their right guy, because so many of these guys are going to be going very quickly. We know that teams start to kind of panic if one of the big-time guys at a position that they need goes off the board. So I would expect a big-time run on offensive linemen, and probably that to be the most picked position in this upcoming draft, at least in the first round. And then kind of the wide receiver position is the other one that we've been watching in the first round a lot. And it feels like the 3 wide receivers in top 10, they will be going top 10. I think there's very little chance that any of those guys fall out of there. Maybe Roma Dunze, but I still think he will be a top 10 pick. Now, the question is, what happens after that? You have so many guys that are so talented, and feels like people are ordering them in a ton of different ways. You have Brian Thomas, A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Ladd McConkey, even Ricky Pearsall is getting in that conversation. So there are so many guys and different ways to rank them, but there isn't one after those top 3 guys in the top 10 until Brian Thomas at 17, at least in this particular mock draft. Now, I've seen his over-under is at 16.5, so you can take what you want. I believe his under is actually minus money right now, so definitely interesting that they have him at 17, but Vegas would have him at 16, 15, a little bit earlier on in the draft. But it'll be interesting to see. But after Brian Thomas, or including Brian Thomas, there are 4 of the last 15 picks of the first round were wide receivers. So plenty of talent in this wide receiver class. Same thing like offensive lineman. You might have to stretch to get the guy you absolutely want. I believe in this one they had Xavier Legette going 32 to the Chiefs. I've seen Xavier Worthy there. I've seen Ladd McConkey there. So that'll definitely be one to watch later on in that draft, or in the first round of that draft. Corners is another position that really blew up in the first round, and a little bit surprising to me, but when you look at the names, I mean, it's hard to really fault anyone. So it starts with Quinyon Mitchell. He was the first of 5 cornerbacks taken in the first round of this mock draft. He was 13 to the Raiders. Then he followed up with guys like Terrion Arnold, who I think was only a couple of picks after him, Cooper DeJean, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Nate Wiggins. There are so many talented cornerbacks, and that's leaving out guys like Kamari Lassiter, who I think could be an absolute difference maker at the next level. But let's get to kind of the later round quarterbacks. Michael Penix did not have to wait long in this mock draft. He was the top pick of the second round to the Rams, a pick that I think is as good of a fit as he possibly could want in the NFL. And then you have Bo Nix shortly after the Giants, and if I'm being totally honest with you, I think he could totally take over the starting role this year from Daniel Jones, even when Daniel Jones is making all that money. I think Bo Nix is some of the things that Daniel Jones isn't, with all of the good things that Daniel Jones is. So it'll be really interesting to watch that develop, but I would definitely be keeping my eye out on that one if he does end up in New York. And we've talked about the safety position a little bit on here and how it's kind of a weaker position for the most part. But 2 guys that have found their way into the top 2 rounds are Cole Bishop and Javon Bullard. 2 guys that I think are on just a different level than every other safety in this class. So totally makes sense to me that these are the guys that go as early as they have. I think they could even climb up the board even more. I think both those guys just play so well all over the field. So very excited about those 2 in particular. If you don't get those 2 and you need a safety, you might want to wait until a little bit later in the draft and hope you just pick the right guy. But those 2 especially, I think, are kind of standing above everyone else. But as I look more and more through these mock drafts and kind of they get a little bit longer for me. You know, you start with the first round, then you get to 3-round drafts, then 5-round, then 7-round, and the more I look through these drafts and the more I, scour through all the names, and maybe it's just because, last year was such a remarkable year in college football, but it feels like this is a very, very talented NFL draft class. It feels like we will be looking back on this draft class and saying, man, at every single position, there's an absolute difference maker. There is a guy that could be a Hall of Famer at most positions, and I think even when you look later on in the draft, I mean, this mock draft that I've been talking about with Kuiper and Field Yates went 100 picks, and Jatavion Sanders was the last pick to the Commanders. And when you talk about someone like Jatavion Sanders, he was one of the best pass catchers at tight end in the entire country. He was a huge player for Texas. There are some blocking concerns with him. I won't necessarily discount that at all, but I definitely think he is someone that could be a huge player at the next level, and he's going 100. And you have guys like Junior Colson, Cam Hart from Notre Dame, Jonah Ellis, the edge rusher from Utah, Zach Zinter, who got injured for Michigan but was a huge player for them. All those guys going in the 3rd round. So there is an ability in this draft that I feel like hasn't been there in previous drafts, where you can get really deep into this one and still find a guy that can help you tremendously. So very, very excited about that. I think this class in particular is just going to be so much fun to watch. But let's give you an idea of not only who's going to be there, but who to kind of watch as we kind of go through this next couple of weeks and or I guess this next week really. But the quarterbacks there are the quarterbacks you really want to be there. Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, and Drake May, the guys that will likely go 1, 2, 3. So we won't see them in that green room for too long, I don't expect. But then you have Terrion Arnold and Quinyon Mitchell, the 2 top corners I would expect off the board. And then you have the top wide receivers, in my opinion. I think you go Malik Neighbors will definitely be off the board very early. Roma Dunze, the same thing. Marvin Harrison Jr. will be the very first wide receiver and pass catcher off the board, in my opinion. And then there's a little bit up in the air with Brian Thomas. I feel like there's been a couple of different ones that I've had A.D. Mitchell in that 4 spot. I've had Xavier Worthy in that 4 spot. But Brian Thomas Jr., in my opinion, is the wide receiver 4 in this class and will be a huge difference maker at the next level. And then you get to offensive line, and only J.C. Latham seems to want to show up. It sounds like Joe Alt was probably going to be hanging out with his family somewhere, which, to be totally honest with you, is probably what I would do in this scenario, but got to enjoy the experience. So really excited to see J.C. Latham there. He'll be there with one of his Alabama teammates, Dallas Turner, a couple Alabama guys in this group, actually, and then Liati Latu, who absolutely will go in the first round, but a little bit later in the first round from UCLA, and then Darius Robinson, the D lineman from Missouri, who I very much believe will go in the first round. I think there is a little bit up in the air there just because edge rushing is kind of a confusing position to wrap your head around, but I would expect him to go somewhere in the 20s. He might be the last of this group that is sitting in that green room, but at the end of the day, as long as your name is called, I think they're more than fine with that. But cannot wait for next week. I think it's going to be one of the more fun, not only first rounds, but the entirety of the draft. I think is going to be one of the more fun ones we've seen in quite some time. I think this group of players that we have this year is just downright special, and it'll be really, really fun to watch them kind of get drafted here in a week, but also develop into the players that they're capable of being. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some unsung heroes of the top teams in the country, some players that might not get the recognition that they deserve, but they are definitely going to be big-time reasons that these teams have success in 2024. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that.